gentlemen, this is David Murphy, publisher of the National Black Unity News. The National Black Unity News is a publication, it's a periodical, and it's a solution-oriented publication, and it's by us and it's for us. It's unique in so many different ways. We are self-supporting, and the people that support this publication are people who have great expertise in so many different fields. And they come to you sharing great information that can enhance your quality of life. So again, we welcome everybody who will see this podcast. And I'm more than positive you will gain some knowledge about my guest and some of the things that he does. And I'm going to jump right on into this. First of all, Mr. Michael Haynie, I met this brother several years ago, but I knew of him many years ago. See, I do a lot of research, and I know one of his family members as well. She and I go a long way back, his sister, Michelle. And but Mr. Michael Haynie, sometimes you don't know when people's lives cross sometimes. But I come to realize that he came up in the village in which I came up in. He knew some of the people that I know. He crossed some of the same paths, but at different times. But nevertheless, he traveled some of the same roads that I did. And Michael, you know how I am. I'm very inquisitive because before people tell who they are, what they do, sometimes you have to know where they've been to know where they're going. Sometimes, and as a young man, who influenced you? What shaped your mind to start your education or your career first? How did you just, like I said, who molded you or what molded you, or a combination of things? How did you get started when you went, before you went to school and chose this particular field?
David, first of all, I appreciate immensely being here today and sharing my story. As I look back and reflect that I'll be 64 years old on March 20th next week. And, each birthday now is a milestone for me. It gives me a chance to reflect, because at the end of the day, I want to say I shouldn't be here based on how I live, some of the things I've done throughout my life, but 64 years of accumulation of stuff to put me in a position to have this conversation with you and reflect to your question on the influences of my life and some of the things that I have done to get me to this point of being able to have this conversation with you. Wow, man, wow. It becomes very emotional,
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't take it lightly being asked or being in a position. And so I always make sure that I prepare myself to share honestly, because what I give people as a perception of who I am, they can only gain it if I'm honest with me about who I am. Right. And I try to, on a daily basis, be honest with me, because, I am not a product of what I do, meaning that there's certain things I do professionally, but that isn't necessarily who I am. First of all, who I am, I'm a human being that hurts and has feelings and has taken myself through a multitude of things throughout my life to get to a point to be successful in what I do. So to your question about my influences in life, I think back to my time in Evanston Village, being raised with no male figure in my household, and the multitude of men that coached me, the multitude of men that coached me, be it in basketball or baseball when I was 6 and 7 years old, and it wasn't so much about the sports, it was about the direction and the camaraderie and my ability to interact with men that were role models to show me, what and where I could be to where I am now in life. Mm-hmm. So a multitude of people helped, because my mom, in short, because my mom was predominant as a parent, as a adult role model in my life growing up. And so she knew, having a son or two sons, that it was important that male role models were going to be important to influence them. And was it successful? Well, it depends on how you measure that. And I think as we continue our conversation, we can talk about some of the successes of me as a human being, growing up to be a human being and treating myself humanistically, and some of the things that weren't successful at all, because I decided to do my own thing. But to your question, that long answer I gave, people in my community, males in my community, that took a interest in me for whatever reasons, and giving me directions in terms of being proper, polite, of good hygiene, and of good character, and setting that foundation for me when I was 6 and 7 years old. I remember as clearly as though it was yesterday.
All right, fantastic. It's extremely important. Like you just said, you had a mother who was aware of the fact that you needed to have men in your life. And like you say, it helped shape and mold you into what you are today. And but we had a brief conversation some time ago, and when you went to college, it has another effect on your life. I think you said you went to Boston, I believe it was, and you had to face some some serious things in life there. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so David, I grew up in Evanston Village, as I mentioned. I went to a very, I won't call it diverse church, just in the village, just outside the village, where I still attend church today. I walked to that church from where I lived in Evanston Village, which was at that point turned into a majority Black community. But the church that my mother chose for us to attend in 1965 was all white. We were the first Black family there.
Okay.
And it was at the height of the segregation in Baltimore City. It was at the height of the civil rights movement. And here we were, a family of 5 Black people, 4 kids and a single mom, being invited into this church and being treated. I was 7 years old, and being treated, hey, welcomed, et cetera, just welcomed, and they accepted us, and they embraced us. The priest at that time, Father Malthus, was down in Selma marching, where I just happened to be last weekend. Mm-hmm. And so they were very conscientious of the need to be to embrace all sorts of people, as God intended us to be. God intended us to be a melting pot where it didn't make a difference who you were from a color or culture perspective, but that we all figured out how to get along. That's why I believe he made us all different creeds and color, to tease himself and letting us see how we interacted with each other. But the point is, having been in an environment like that, where I was the only, having gone to a school, junior and high school, where it was very diverse, I decided to go to Boston for a multitude of reasons. There was the money there, I played sports, and the very first day I was there, we transitioned my stuff in my room. My mother had to go back on the train. I took her back to the train station, Back Bay in Boston. She said, "Hey, Mike, go give me a coat for the train ride." Went in there, it was just me and 2 guys behind the counter, and I'm waiting. I'm 18 years old, just leaving Baltimore. Never had really any interaction racially with anyone. I was kind of shielded from that. And so I'm waiting at the end of the counter, innocent to what was really happening. And finally a guy said to the other guy, "Hey, Joe, go see what that nigger down there wants." Whoa. And so I'm stunned, right? I'm stunned. I'm 18 years old. My mother's getting ready to leave me. I'm in this city where I knew there was segregation issues, but I had never been called a nigger in my life at that point. And I was stunned that this is what I was reduced to 2 other human beings. And I always say, people I hear now use the word N-word, right? They say the N-word. I use the word nigger, because until we understand the gravity of what we hear and the impact of that word, see, every time I say that word, it has an impact on me, right? The word N, the letter N, and saying the N-word doesn't have an impact. And I think that becomes an excuse for us to continue to describe and explain the use of the word nigger the way it was, prescribed by people in a negative connotation. And still today, you know, we have to understand the gravity of that word. So I use the word, you know, and if it's offensive to anyone, so be it, but that's how I use it, because there's no N describing that word in the dictionary, right? So they said, go see what that nigga wants. I continued to buy the soda because I was so stunned. Whereas probably 5 years later, I would have said, man, are you all crazy? Whatever. But I refused to tell my mother what had happened, because if I had, she probably would have told me I had to come home with her. She probably wouldn't have let me stay.
Oh, wow.
You know, because to be exposed to that for me, and maybe she had been exposed to it in her life, but I had never. But I would come to find out after that, that word became one that I was called so much in the city of Boston. So many times I thought it was my middle name, right? So I was walking by our arena one time, and these young kids in high school where they practice, as an example, where they practice hockey in our arena at Northeastern, and they were walking by, me and my friend at that time were heading to our place, leaving basketball and track practice, and these kids start swinging their hockey sticks at us, and one of their parents says, leave them niggas alone, right? Young kids, 9, 10 years old, swinging their hockey sticks at us. Then I remember the other time, it was June of 1978, and these times are clear to me, right? And it shaped where I am today and some of the things that I wanted to attain in my career as a result of people seeing the difference of me as a person of color versus who they were as whites or whatever, that may have thought they had the power to influence and do what I wanted to do. So another time, there was a place in Boston called South Boston. South Boston was notorious for never going over if you were a Black person. You never crossed the bridge into South Boston.
Oh, okay.
So me and a friend of mine, Larry Harris, we were going to the airport to pick up a car to go home, whatever. And we made a mistake and we crossed over into the bridge into South Boston. So we get to the end of the bridge, a police officer stopped us. They said to us, he says, what are you niggas doing over here? Do you know where you are? He said, turn around and get the hell out of here before I lock you up. This is in 1978, right? So for me not to explain the significance, and Boston grew me up. The best experience I had, when I look back on my experience professionally, educationally, raising children, because it allowed me to deal with a multitude of people in a manner, understanding how they treated me, but figuring out another way to circumvent that so that we as a people had the ability to influence and have the power, you know? So yeah, Boston was for 6 years for me, an enlightening journey, an educational opportunity. And I can tell you so many of those stories that I recall that were milestones in my life and in my mind, because they motivated me to do some of the things I did professionally that I thought would be a benefit to all people.
Yes, and like, you know, I don't know, I hear some static, but in any case, can you hear me pretty clearly?
Yeah, I hear you very good, man.
Okay. You know, there was a time, I believe that, you know, yes, Boston had some issues with you that you had to deal with and overcome. And like you said, it shaped you to what you do today. But when you got back to Baltimore, did you come from Boston back to Baltimore?
So I left Boston, you know, and I did a multitude of things in Boston. I went to a cooperative education institution, Northeastern, that the mantra was to prepare you to work in the environment, right? And so hotels, I was attracted to hotels. I walked into a hotel as part of my cooperative education experience, and I just fell in love with the environment. So my wife at that time got pregnant. She was from Washington, D.C. We moved to Washington, D.C., which started my journey in traveling throughout the country in the hotel business, because if you're in management in hotels, you know, you're not always just situated in one place, but if you were to grow, you had to agree to move around. So I left Boston in 1982 and transitioned to Washington, D.C., and lived in Washington, D.C. for a number of years. And that's where my career began to take place and take hold. And I begun to rise through certain management positions in Washington, D.C.
Okay. Now, is that considered, how would you pronounce that, hospitality business or service?
So I call it people call it hospitality, tourism, hotels. You know, I've begun to teach people in my training now, which I do, that hospitableness or hospitality is something that should be indicative and important to a multitude of industries, whether you're in the newspaper business and you're an interviewer, whether you're in retail, whether you're in industry, whether you're in healthcare, that being hospitable is something that should be a requirement of all business, and it's not specifically an industry anymore. You know, it's tourism, we're in tourism, and we're hospitable people, but you're hospitable, you were hospitable to me. So I've begun to change people and influence people differently. And thank God I'm in a position 40 some years later that people understand and listen to why I believe that hospitality is not an industry as it was decades ago, but it's a way of life and treating people. And our industry is tourism, or specifically the hotel and restaurant industry.
Let me ask you something. In that industry then, did you see many people like yourself?
So that's a great question, David, because there were not many. You know, I started off, I was a director of security initially, director of security with the alcohol habit. Man, I could tell you, you know, we need a mini series for some of the things and some of the ways I had to grow. I made $4.83 an hour when I was working at the Mayflower Hotel in DC, you know, beginning my career, because that's what they told me I had to do. When I got my first management position as a director of security at a Ramada Hotel in 1983, I was making $18,000 a year, working a minimum of 90 hours a week. So you divide that into $18,000 a year, but that's what you had to do. That's what they told me I had to do if I wanted to rise through the ranks, right? Because there weren't many that looked like us. You know, a mid-level supervisor was it. But, you know, I always have had the personality that when I get into something, I want to be in charge, because I'm not the type of person that like people tell me what to do, right? So let me take it as far as I can so I can be that guy that is kind of in charge, you know, because I don't like people telling me what to do. So from director of security, I went to executive housekeeper, where you start to see a bit more of us because it was the influence of people cleaning, etc. And that was acceptable as a role for Black people to manage other Black people, even though it's the most resourceful area and the area that had the highest amount of expense, you know, cleaning supply, labor. So you really had to understand management to manage that. And most successful general managers came out of the housekeeping or director of sales arena, because it mentioned, I mean, at one point I managed 700 employees, you know, in a 1,500 room hotel. You know, you had at that point that many employees in a department. So you had a significant number of employees. And so they found a new hybrid position for me, because that was before they had the electronic key cards.
Yeah.
And so you had a multitude of people that stole things out of rooms. So you had housekeepers that would steal all your jewelry, etc. So they said, well, Mike's a director of security, he has electronic security experience. So let's make him a director of security / executive housekeeper. So I had both of those positions at once, with the purpose of ensuring that the employees didn't steal out of the guest rooms, because we had a big jewelry theft ring at one hotel, which is why they wanted me to do that. And then from there, they figured I was a good executive housekeeper. I managed people well. I knew how to keep the facility clean, right? and people liked my people skill capability. So I began to develop, and this was in the mid 80s, late 80s, I began to develop further and further my skill set in the industry, got some recognition, but the glass ceiling was these departmental positions to the executive level positions of actually managing a hotel or being in the corporate arena. When I finally got to that point, David, in 1995, as a general manager of a hotel, there was only 12 Black general managers in the country at recognized hotels. In 1998, when I became the general manager of the Sheraton Airport Plaza in Charlotte, I was the first Black general manager in the state of North Carolina. Let's remember that this was only 23, 24 years ago, right? So it wasn't very long. I was the first Black, and I was greeted when I went down there by 15 employees walking off the job saying that they would never work for that nigger. That's what they said to me at a Sheraton at the airport in Charlotte, right? So I can tell you about a multitude, to your question, of glass ceilings and racism, particularly in that industry, which Black dollars contribute significantly to tourism, but doesn't necessarily equate to our representation in the positions that matter. You know, but back just very quickly, David, I figured out a way. I figured that it was important for me to be at the table, right? To be at the table. So I endured a lot. If I go back to the 80s and the Mayflower and the Ramada and the Crown Plaza out in Rockville where I worked, and I kept my mouth closed, a bit different than I did in Boston, because first of all, at that point, I had like 3 kids, soon to have 5 by the mid 90s or early 90s. So it was important to me to make money and have a decent salary. And I knew that I always wanted to be an advocate to help people that look like me not have to go through the doors or deal with the barriers that I had to go through to be a director of security, executive housekeeper, rooms manager, which is a position that oversees everything that's not food and beverage and sales related, right? And that's another path to being a general manager of a hotel. And so I kept my mouth closed because I said, at this point, I have to infiltrate. And someone told me something that was profound once, that was instrumental in me understanding that I needed a strategy to get to the higher level and position where I could be influential and help others that look like me get to that level as well. They said, Michael, people aren't stupid. They see and hear what you're doing. They're not going to say anything. They're going to just sit and watch and allow you to do whatever you do and take adverse action if they have to against you based on what they see and hear you doing. In other words, what they were telling me, to not think that I was so smart or so knowledgeable, or let other people know that I was so smart and knowledgeable all the time of my strategies, that it prohibited me from growing and being in a position where I could do something. Or in other words, shut the heck up, Mike, and just play dumb for a minute to get where it is you need to go. And then once you get inside the boardrooms, exploit or deploy your strategies of allowing people to be now of a sudden in a position to grow and go and be supervisors and management, because now you have the ability to influence.
Yeah, but let me ask you this now. You mentioned, man, like I say, in that particular industry. Now, see, I do know some history about that, you know, about us in that industry. Now, you know, you've seen the story, the old movies where most of our most famous Black people could not even go in the front door, you know, even if they was the headliner of an event there or something. They still had to go through the back doors and things like that, you know. Matter of fact, you know, we couldn't be saying, I don't care what kind of thing, you know, they had special doors for us to go in just to, you know, to do what we needed to do. And most of the time we couldn't even sleep in those type of places. You heard of the hard story, people going up and down 95. That used to have this the green book, you know, because there was no place for us to stay at most hotels and things like that. And so, brother, you know, that's why one of the reasons why I'm so, you know, so grateful to you, because you went another way, man, and you had to go, like you say, had to go through many trials and tribulations to do what you had to do. But nevertheless, you made it to the top, and man, that's a powerful story. Matter of fact, that's a movie. I'll be honest with you. No, because like I say, people see, there's. So I'm a printer by trade, and we had a lot of black mom and pop print shops and stuff like that. But the deeper industry behind the print shop is paper. And most of us, even to this day, is not involved with the paper industry. It's kind of closed off to us. We just can't get in there. The only one of two people I've known, they may have a distribution place, but when it comes to paper, we are there. So it's a whole bunch of industries that has not even been penetrated yet by us. And but for you to do what you have done, man, I commend you for that because it takes like you say, finesse, man. You had to endure it. Like you say, you had to have some type of strategies because I do know people in certain places will set you up, use you, manipulate you, and do everything else. But for you to get to where you've been, it did have to take some strategy, some tenacity, man, some stick with it, and I appreciate you for that. And since you've been in that industry, what are you doing now?
So David, first of all, just to step back for a second, and I'm going to get to that question because, when you talk about 64 years and 64 years, so we talk about 44 of those years, 45 of those years doing one thing and being in an industry. I knew I had arrived, David, because it wasn't just about me. And I want to make sure we get to the point of how we as a people have to bring people along. It's just not about me getting somewhere. I knew I had arrived when I was sitting in a boardroom meeting. First of all, I was the only Black in a company of hotels, one of the largest hotel companies in the country. They had over 300 and some properties at that time. In 1997, 98, we had a conference in Atlanta. And I knew I'd arrived when they said with me in the room, whether they knew I was there or not, or said it as a test, they said, hey, you need to get your niggers under control. And I'm at the table. So I knew I'd arrived when they felt comfortable saying that in front of me. And I knew my lack of reaction was my ultimate penetration and my ultimate infiltration to be in a position to put our people, all people, because I believe affirmative action is an opportunity for all people, but ensuring that people that look like me absolutely had an opportunity if they were ready. And that's what I used to always tell my people. If you're not properly prepared, don't think that you get a pass from me just because it's a brother deal. No. We're going to get you ready if this is what you want to do. I have probably maybe about 800-900 managers in this country that were under me and influenced by me, and my ability to put them in positions of upper or middle management. There's probably about 30 or 40 general managers that are off of my tree as a result. And the sacrifice for me is that I lost jobs. I've been fired 3 times. And if I was fired, whether it was for cause or not for cause, the ultimate was that my mantra and idea was to give people, particularly Black people and Spanish people as well, because these people, they helped propel my career. Spanish, Black, Koreans, because that's what you see in hotels is a multitude of cultures in the hotel business. And many of them are in a position like Blacks are, not to have an opportunity for upward mobility. Then they get someone like me that gives them a real opportunity because I have real power and ability within that structure to give them the training, to put them in a position to be successful, to earn decent money for their families. Because an executive housekeeper nowadays can make $150,000 a year. General manager can make $450,000 a year. So it's decent money, and we weren't always exposed to that. So them understanding that I had infiltrated them, meaning the system had understood I infiltrated. Now all of a sudden I had all these Black people being moved into positions of director of sales, front office managers, a couple that were applying for general managers, and they had to either tell them no or give them good reason why they didn't, because they knew now what my intentions were is what was crucial, right? So I came back to Baltimore, David, to get to your question about what I'm doing now. In 2001, I came back to the area of Baltimore. I ran a hotel out in Security Boulevard as a Holiday Inn, and I brought Black people in there and let them have things. I also ran the Radisson at Cross Keys for a period of time as well. But my last hotel assignment was the Tremont Hotel downtown in Baltimore. The Tremont was known as a very luxurious hotel. And then I built out the Tremont Grand on Charles Street, which was probably, we spent $33 million renovating that historic site into what they call the only 5-star meeting facility in the state. And for a person like me to run it white glove service, because, you know, hey, I have standards. You know, I've run brands, I've been to Europe, I've done a multitude I was prepared well. You know, we talk about the Embassy Row in DC and interacting. You know, we haven't even talked about the South Africans that refused to stay in a hotel run by a Black man. I can give you all sorts of stories, but I was raised to understand protocol, understand body language, understand, you know, I was taught very well mannerisms, you know, so I knew how to service and take care of people. So they brought me to Baltimore to run the Tremonts, renovated, open it, offer 5-star service, and it was a phenomenal experience. You know, all roads lead home. I'm home in Baltimore. I'm running this phenomenal meeting facility. And I don't always like to talk about myself, but you can still ride up Charles Street and see this artist picture of me in charcoal in the Tremont Grand windows as you go up Charles Street where we had the cafe. They spent, I think, like $50,000 doing that. They wanted to create some sort of profile diversity. So the owner at that point, Chris Smith out of DC, big developer who I worked for, you know, had his artists do a remnant of me in the windows. And so it's, and my mom rides up there occasionally. I said, man, that sure would be nice to have 50 or 60 years of from now. And it's a source of pride, you know, but to be home in Baltimore after being away was the biggest source. So I ran the Tremonts, and I believe that I influenced a multitude of people. The Tremonts was good for me. I was good for the Tremonts, but after, at that point, 38 years in the industry, and someone asked me, Mike, where's our $3 million profit this month during the height of a recession back then, 08, 09, and 10 were not good years in this country. I said, you know what? I'm tired of getting gut punched for profit for people. I need to go to work for myself, you know? And so I left at that point, the Tremonts, and opened up Parkway Management and Consulting, where we did consulting in the tourism industry. A year from then, I spun that into the Maryland Center for Hospitality Training. Parkway is still in existence and still does a lot of strategic study, but Maryland Center for Hospitality Training was asked to open because at that point, I was working with a multitude of high schools. I was an industry advocate in the city and the state, bringing high schoolers into the industry to do internships and understand the dynamics of our industry. So the city at that point, I think, was Stephanie Rollins-Blake and a guy named Tom Noonan, who headed up the Visitors Bureau, said, Mike, you do training. We got the casinos coming in. We would love if you start a training center to train our people to work in the casinos, because the MOU requires that, and we'll give you this very small contract to start with. And so that's what started the Maryland Center for Hospitality Training. And we've begun to do a lot of workforce development training, 90% people of color, 90% women of color, most of them in positions where they were either returning citizens or had no understanding of workforce because they had never worked before.
We will be back after these messages.
The mission of Global Training Centers LLC is to create a learning environment for employees to acquire customer service skills, and to gain and sustain employment in the gaming, hospitality, and related service industries. Our sole purpose is to offer an opportunity to provide direct support, development and leadership in customer service to the workforce of the world.
Welcome back. That's amazing. That you had that not only during your history that you had that much influence to help people, you say move up the ladder because you, like you say, strategically you were doing that, and even from the corporate, from the boardroom already, down to being self-employed. You have already, like I said, you was helping people who had, when you say reentry, coming up, man, that's just, I been finding it fantastic. See, you learn something new every day, about people when you, I guess, when you question them sometimes, you ask sometimes, and like I say, man, you've done a lot of, from my perspective, a lot of historical things that, and I appreciate you, for that journey. And but Mike, your story, like I said, to me, is just beginning. And now I know you're doing quite a few other things, but one of the things I want you to elaborate on is this podcast. Where did that come from? What inspired you to do such a thing as that podcasting?
My trip to Africa last summer. I went to Africa to explore business opportunity, but really to find myself and find out who I was. And so, and what I mean.
Hold, let me stop you right there for a minute. I just, that, because, I'm an old fella, I forget sometimes, if I don't ask right then and there. Yeah, you went to Africa, you said to find yourself. What was going on in your life at that time that you need to find yourself?
Well, because I knew where I was. I knew where I wasn't necessarily a result of who I really am, and that there was something intriguing and a need to go to Africa to explore not only the opportunity for business, but to explore my history and heritage.
Okay.
And to get a sense of who I was as a person.
I understand that because, I come from a little place called Whiteville, North Carolina. That's where my family is. And, I went there on several, just for that reason. This is my immediate roots. I wanted to know the land that my father was on. I want to experience. I went to the graveyard to see my ancestors was all in there, and it was a spiritual thing as well, but I do understand. So I appreciate that,
Yeah, and I come from a place, my grandfather, paternal grandfather, Whitestone, Virginia, right? And I realized why they came from Whitestone, because of his proximity to the water and coming over from that part of Africa. But to go to Africa and to find myself from a perspective of looking at people that look like me, that ran businesses like me, that let me know, in spite of what it is that I heard in 1976 in that shop in Boston, as a Black man, was not who it was that they called and described when I went to a place like Nairobi or Uganda, and they reinforced that I was somebody. Not that I didn't understand that I was during the course of the past 63 years, but to go to a place of people that look like me and to find myself and to see people and to see someone. I said to my sister, I said, that guy looks like me. How do you go and walk up to a kid and say, that kid could be my son or my brother, when I was in Africa? And I was amazed at what I found, but what I discovered was a different part of me. So to come back, I realized there was a need for me to do something to communicate to our people here in America. First of all, the opportunities and the ability for them to potentially discover what I discovered, a history and heritage that was absolutely mine. You know, it was mine. I had to own it, and I had to understand it or begin to understand it. And to also understand, one of the things I learned over there was the need for us to begin to collaborate, communicate our experiences, and to share abundantly and unselfishly for the purposes that the more that we shared, the more that we understood, the better we were as a people. So I started this podcast on September 12th of the year 2021, expressly for the purposes of owning what it is that I learned and I did while I was in Africa. And giving it up, man, giving it up, you know, no inhibitions, you know, being as honest and open as I told you earlier that I have to be with people, with our people, from the voice that I have, because, you know, I understand that my platform is one, you know, David, I was the first Black person in the state of Maryland to serve on the tourism board for the governor. Governor O'Malley at that time loved the Tremont. He said this was the best hotel he's ever had all his board meetings there, et cetera. We interacted a bit. Regardless of what I thought, I appreciate the fact that he said that. So I was appointed to the state tourism board. I was the first Black to be appointed in that position. I was the first Black to be chosen the tourism person of the year. I was appointed to the PAC task force on post-Labor Day school start, and the post-Labor Day school start executive order signed by the governor, Hogan, who came into office at that point, was a direct result of what it is that I said to him and asked him to do. And people don't know that. The white people that were part of that understood who instigated that. But there's a lot of things that I know that I have been able to influence. But the point of it is understanding that people know certain things about me. There's still a degree that I feel a rigorous, honest, that I have to give our own people, even though maybe I'll be a target in doing so, because I know I do have a certain profile and people watch and listen to what I say. Just like, as I mentioned earlier, you know, I lost jobs because people knew once I infiltrated, my goal was to ensure that our people and all people were treated fairly and given an opportunity to be successful. And the same thing with my messaging in my podcast, bringing education leaders, bringing leaders from Africa, bringing people that have had influence and whose voices were quieted so that the information that they were able to share was not given to people for a point of education. Because the last thing that would be helpful to society, the greater society, is for us to educate each other and collaborate with each other to create some sort of plan, not to go against them, but to make our own situation as a people better economically, educationally, and from a standpoint of justice and spiritually. That's not what is necessarily wanted by all of society.
Well, Michael Haynie, let me say this to you, brother. You know, I've been around the block once or twice. And I know people have, you know, everybody has to carry their cross, so to speak. You know, your journey is your journey. But you know, you was put on such a special journey. You know, your life is no different from anybody else, but you know, a lot of people cannot do what other people can do. You know, some people I like to say the terminology is like predestined to do certain things in life. Because it seemed like, just looking back from my perspective, looking back over your life, the things you did from the Emerson Village to the church, to Boston, and all the other places that you've been, you got a real good education. But you had to figure things out. You had to work it out, you know, and you endured it. Because a lot of people easily gave up and gave in, and I can't even imagine what you had to go through. Just on my own thing, man, I had to go through so much because of discrimination and everything else. But nevertheless, you know, the journey that you have been on and you still on is that, you know, you've been through a lot of places, but you never forgot, who you are and whose you are. And you mentioned you always reach back to try to help bring somebody else up because you understand what it takes. You lived it, and you see what people have to go through sometimes. So you do have to prepare people for the journey, just like children. If you don't prepare your children, they're going to be a rude awakening when they hit the real world. But your podcast alone, I watch a lot of podcasts, but I learned so much from listening to the podcast that you host. The people that you have on there, man, gave me so much information about so many different things. So I appreciate you for that. The work you did, like I said, the work you're doing and the work you have done. But Michael Haynie, again, man, somebody need to write do a movie about you, bro. I'm serious. No, because you have a remarkable journey. Because, like I say, the industry, I keep saying the industry, has such a bad connotation on us as a people because of the history of it. No, I mean, we had and other things, but this was more blatant than anything else because, like I say, we used to travel. We used to have special things, green card, just to travel up down the roads. I remember one of the greatest things that entertainers and people who was in politicians, their most, how would you say, bad moments in life was about the hotel business. The things that, much as they did and they couldn't go in there. People had left the country before those same reasons. They could perform there, but they still had to go through the back door. And then we found a brother like yourself. And I know, I always said if our ancestors could stand up and look at you now and see what you have accomplished, man, see, they would be cheering you on, man, because they would say, job well done. And I'm quite sure they ain't the only one will be saying that to you. And like I said, I commend you, brother, because I even watch, some of the movies. I'm one of them old people. I used to hang around old people. I love sitting around old people. And my own family used to tell me horror stories about how they was treated. And they worked at places like that. My father was a well-educated man. And he had 2.5 years of college back in the 40s. That's almost like a doctorate degree today, But, he was a military man too, but they had him cleaning out toilets and stuff, with his education, and to beat him down. And and so that's another whole story. But what I'm saying to you is this: because you had the tenacity, the strength, the fortitude, man, to endure all of those things, and I know it ain't easy, because I've been through a lot of things myself. But for you to reach the heights that you have done, and been to the places that you have been, and talk to the people that you had talked to, and people that you had brought up, and I know oftentimes, most people, traditional man, they don't give you a lot of thanks or accolades sometimes for the work that you have done for them personally. Sometimes you only get a thank you sometimes. But I want to thank you for what you've done, man, because like I say, you see, people, people sometimes take things for granted, but you have actually put food on people's table indirectly. And you continue to, because you continue to train people. And you know what's out there. So I can imagine what the training is like, what you're giving up to people. You ain't taking, ain't no prisoner, you ain't giving nothing away, but you have to prepare people in the real world. You have to keep it real. This is what's going to be out there. This is what you face with. And before we close out, tell me a little bit about your training. How does that work? How can people get involved in something?
So David, we do a multitude of training. As I mentioned initially, our training vehicle started with Baltimore City back in 2011 because I worked with a lot of public schools, and I always was involved with our young people and internship opportunities, job shadowing, et cetera. So the mayor and some other people said, hey, why don't you help us with this? And so the training is ongoing in terms of last year, we worked with Ocean City. to supply young people and people down there that wanted to work that didn't have an experience of the beach and living on their own from Baltimore City. So the Maryland Center for Hospitality Training, all you gotta do is Google it. It's very well known in this region. The Maryland Center for Hospitality Training, which is a subsidiary of our larger company that you see behind me, Global Training Centers, LLC. That's the company that I took to Nairobi, Kenya, and opened up an office. We have an office in North Carolina. And we do workforce development training that I mentioned, preparing people for the workforce in our industry or in the tourism industry, healthcare industry, and retail industry as well, because there's commonalities between what the soft social, emotional intelligence skills that people need, or in other words, learn how to deal with people. Because many companies can teach you the technical aspect, but if you're a jerk, like they say at the stadium, don't be a jerk, right? And we teach you how to engage and get along with people. And you're amazed as how simple it sounds, but it's not very easy when you put two people in the same space that may come from different neighborhoods or may have been raised differently, understand the basics of human interaction. So we do a lot of that. And then we do it on a level of management skills training and coaching and counseling and executive leadership training, diversity, equity, and inclusion training. So we do a multitude of training. So people just Google Global Training Centers, LLC, or Maryland Center for Hospitality Training. You know, if you're interested in any training for us, and I'm sure through the Black Unity newspaper where, you know, I will have a regular article or should have a regular article, you can touch bases with my contact information. And our podcast is available, David, every Sunday at 6 p.m. And I'm real excited this coming Sunday because this is the Sunday to watch this gentleman that went from jail to Yale. Powerful story of a guy named Chris Wilson, man. And if you want to learn tenacity, and if we want to get a role model, matter of fact, this guy is so powerful, a guy named Wes Moore wrote his foreword of his book, right? So let's listen to Chris Wilson this weekend. And then the following week, you know what I have? You know, I got my mom, man. How many people get an opportunity to interview their mother? That was the foundation of my life, right? And so to talk about her, she was one of the first Black police officers in the city of Baltimore. But moreover, in the 60s, how do you raise children? You know, what are the struggles? You know, I know a bunch of my friends have lost their mom, so they've embraced my mom. And this is a period for us to celebrate the month of the woman by having my mom interview. You know, I've never seen Lester Holt interview his mom or some of the other folks, but I'm gonna do mine. I'm gonna pay tribute to my mom. Amen. And have her on the show and share her with the world. And then the final week, I've got Bishop Curry, Michael Curry, who has Baltimore roots. If you recall the Black bishop that married Meghan and Harry and quoted Martin Luther King from Buckingham Palace, Michael Curry will be on our show talking about faith, spirituality, and giving us a sense of how to pray, what prayer means, and how as a community collectively we can use our faith and prayer to strengthen ourselves. So we try to do things that are meaningful because, you know, that's where I'm at in my life, David. And I so much appreciate being here, having an opportunity to run my mouth, you know, and being an advocate and talking about some of the things that I'm doing outside of the work professionally that I do. Because I'm not going to be rich. I don't want to be rich. I just want to be able to put food in my mouth, but moreover, give other people an opportunity to do the same. And maybe my story is inspirational. Maybe my story is motivational to someone to do the same. So 3 things before I shut up that were taught to me that were profound. When I was 40 years old, David, someone told me the most profound thing I ever heard. They said, Michael, in order to keep what you have, you got to give it away. I said, what does that mean? They said, time, talent, treasure. In order for you to keep it, you got to give it away. That's God's desire and the spirituality of how life works. So you got to share your time, your talent, your treasure with others, and God will reward you however you recognize God abundantly and ensure, like weeds, those things continue to grow so you can continue to give them away. You reap what you sow is kind of that mentality of giving away time, talent, and treasure. And it was the most profound thing. And guess what, David?
That.
I am in awe at how true it is, man. You know what I'm saying? I can't tell you how true it is. And I teach young people that now, young as 16, 17, because if they get it before 40, when I get it, and they understand what that means and they practice it, they don't have nothing to worry about in life. Time, talent, and treasure, in order to keep it, I have to give it away, because the more I hold on to it tightly, nothing can fulfill it or replenish it, you know? And it works. It works, man.
Yeah, it's a principle. God says it's better, you know, you give and you shall receive, you know. And like I said, that is a powerful, powerful message, man, because it makes so much sense to you. And you said three things. Is that the third? I mean, what's the three things? And then you mentioned one.
Yeah, that was it. Time, talent, treasure.
Okay, gotcha.
Time, talent, treasure.
Okay.
I got to give it away on a daily basis. Practice it as part of principle of who it is that I am. And I'm a human being that only want the best for David. And the more that I do for David, the more that God gives me to do for David. And in the meanwhile, I'm taking care of me as well. You know, but David is a concern, particularly if it's in a situation I heard you mention the other day when your illness was last year, you know, how the community embraced you as well we should, you know, as well we should, and take care of you. And that's what, as a people, we have to begin to share and communicate, which is the beauty of Black Unity News, is that there's information and a vehicle that we can trust, and the professional influence of the people that you have within that circle, phenomenal. These are some phenomenal professionals, man. They could run a country. And now we're sharing information with people in the vehicle of Black Unity News. You know, it's unbelievable.
Well, you know, that's another thing, Michael Haynie, is this, that you know, there's some things that we can control, but there's some things we cannot. But because, you're a willing vessel, just like I am, God will open up doors. He would do things, miraculous things in people's lives, And like I say, my journey is one thing, but your journey is another. But nevertheless, our journeys have interacted now. And we helping each other. But when we helping each other, our bottom line not about me and you, it's about helping others, So, and see, that's the beauty of what you do and what I do. And this is why I want people to know, because there's so much more to this man, Michael Haynie. People can put surface stuff up there, but see, there's something that makes him, that beats deep within him. And it's not all about him, it's about us and our future generations. And he paved the path for many to follow. And Mike, man, I'm just saying this straight up. I keep it real, man. I am so pleased with you, brother, for what you have done and what you, like I said, what you still doing. And I want everybody to know that he has such a powerful podcast that comes on Sundays at 6:00. It will be in the credits, and how you can reach Michael Haynie and some of his training programs and everything else that he does. And but there's so much, and I could be talking to this brother for 5 days when he get to the surface of it. But in any case, I'm glad he took time with us this day to share his information, to share a part of his story with us. But his story is not finished yet. And see, this is what keeps me going strong, man, because of people like Michael Haynie, man, who's out there, who put in the work, as the young folks say, have put in the work. And he has the battle scars and everything else that go along with putting in that type of work. But nevertheless, he didn't give up, he didn't give in. He's still here. He ain't had to do it, but yet he's still putting in work. He's still sharing and caring. And so I thank God for brothers like him. And Mike, anything in close before we shut it down?
Hey, David, I love you. I love you. And as a man to man, it's easy for me to say that now, to express that now, because in order to say that, I had to learn how to love myself, and someone had to teach me that, man. They had to teach me that simply lotioning my body was an expression of love for me, and that until I expressed that love for me, I couldn't express it for you. And I feel good that I'm able to do that now, and I'm able to say that fully and freely, you know, because to our initial question of what was my foundation, and the men in my life at that time, men like you continue to educate me and let me know it's okay to hurt, it's okay to feel, because we suffer from a feeling disease as a people, and we're able to heal and help each other in that immensely. And I just appreciate and I'm grateful for you allowing me to share today, man. It's been very healthy for me.
Yeah, I as well. And I had nothing but much love and respect for you, sir. And I have much love and respect for people who view this video, because there's a lot of work to be done. And if anybody gonna do it, you know, people will do all over this world can come to your aid. But as we seen thus in this country thus far, you know, if we don't start doing for ourselves, helping or lifting one another up, not putting people down, but lift each other up, you never know your mission in life. Just a smile sometimes can change people's lives. But when you find people like a Michael Haynie out there who have demonstrated, not just talked about it, but demonstrated what love can do, what sharing can do, what being persistent can do. You know, you get knocked down, you get back up, you do what you have to do, you have to endure. And so he's a living example of that. And so Michael Haynie, man, much love, much respect, man. Continue to do what you do, sir. And ladies and gentlemen, I thank you and God bless. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, David.